So Al is well aware I am in a purple state marriage, and my husband and I very famously were given marriage advice by James Carville and Mary Madeline, who said, "Don't talk politics at home." Yet for as much time as I spend in the Steelers locker room, all that happens there is the talking of politics. So Al, in this climate, with this election coming up, how does that work? How is this going to work this fall?
Okay, so my personal experience, when we do talk politics, I like to play devil's advocate. That's my only role in the conversation. Uh, you know, I love philosophy. Philosophy is one of the ways that I found, to give a lot of meaning to the world and be able to have, wellness and peace. And one of my favorite philosophers was Socrates. And so Socrates, and especially the Greek philosophers were very skeptical about democracy, and they were very skeptical, even though they coexisted. And Greece, gave way to great philosophers and the concept of democracy. To me, politics is a very boring and a very when I hear politicians just completely lie all the time and never fulfill any of their promises, and understand that it's rhetoric what they're using to try to get people to buy into this popularity contest. I'm not a partisan. I don't really have a political affiliation. I don't have any. I'm very conscious about the individuality versus collective mentality. And to me, individualism is something that I buy on. I don't want to be defined by a group's ideas above my own. And so when we do talk politics, I just want to find people, just kind of like Socrates would do, just finding consistencies, play devil's advocate, have a great conversation, but never get into a fight, never get into something that's going to matter so much. Because at the end of the day, we're football players. We really don't understand that much. Half of us are going to be too lazy to go vote anyway. And it's more important always to have great friendships, and that's what we use political talks and discussions, to share values, to see where we come from, but never to try to convince every other another teammate to the extent that you would get into a fight. That might happen more in the Twitter world and into regular society, but definitely not in NFL locker rooms, or especially the Steelers.
Oh, see, we're at a time though where the idea of getting out to vote is significantly important. And when I think of 2010, 2011, 2012, when you were in New York, that was a pretty politically charged time as well. Do you remember having conversations in the locker room about politics? Do you remember sort of dividing into camps? Who's a red stater, who's a blue stater?
Nah, not necessarily. I remember we had a whole bunch of conversations. We would definitely do that. But oddly enough, like Al said, like for me, I'm the exact same way as him. I think the exact same way as him because I grew up in so many different environments, and I'm able to look at things from so many different perspectives. So my whole role in everything would be to just question people. I'd be like, oh, so you're voting for this guy? Why? And then we'll keep digging deeper and deeper and deeper into that, trying to get them to understand the way other people may see things, and me trying to understand the way they see things. So it was all like, for me, it was all about trying to learn from them and trying to see, because a lot of people, they don't even know why they're voting for a particular person. Some people really do, but other people, they're just like, oh, I like this guy. I like the way he looks. I like some of the things that he says. I like this woman's ability to deliver a message, but they're not really getting into the actual nitty gritty, the actual details, the policies that, these people are actually going out there to try and enforce. So they're just, voting on basically a visceral level. And to see that, to me, was fascinating because I was like, man, do you not understand that your whole life can change based upon the way, this person tries to, enact policy? So for me, not being, American, being from, Nigeria, England, and just absorbing this whole idea of democracy and the way people think and the way people vote was just a fascinating thing for me.
Sam, I'll go back to what I said initially, is that I was always taught politics, religion, you keep it out of general conversation, that those are things that are supposed to be personal. So when you go and you consult at Fortune 500 companies with NFL teams, do you advise them not to talk politics, or do you say, no, like, go ahead, that's not an issue?
No, I mean what I say is that we're going through a transition here in the country, and what's really going on to me in the political conversation I just never hear is that underneath it all we don't actually disagree that much. If you look at the polling, the problem that we have is we have a leadership problem. You know what's really going on is no one's. If you look at the polls, no one's really happy with the choices they have, the leadership options that are available. And part of the problem is something that is happening everywhere, and the NFL is really, I think, in front of this, which is, the definition of leadership, as we have defined it for decades, needs to change. And we have to come up with a new way. We have to think of new ways of how what a leader's like, what they say, what they do, how we relate to these people. It's a change in style. And, leadership, we started in the World War II, right? We still are in some ways in that, where it's like, the general, in football, it's the general model. The coach is the general, and it's very hierarchical. But I think what we're seeing now, and when Colin Kaepernick took a knee, I mean, the first thing that I thought was, this is the first time someone has really said, football needs to mean something. This needs to mean something, and there has to be meaning in what we're doing. And football had always been kind of an island in sports in general, but that was the first time I saw someone make that statement really in the NFL. And what strikes me about that is that the NFL can really do the world a service here. I'm not joking. And that I think the NFL can redefine what leadership is, because you have young coaches that are from a different generation now. You have players who are looking for meaning in a way that they weren't in the past, and politics and social issues are going to have to come into the locker room now. So in order to handle all that, we need to come up with a completely new way of leading. And, I think that's what we're going to see in the next few years, is people are going to start figuring out, how to do this right and how to do it differently. And I think this is a great opportunity for the NFL.
Looking to military members or to football players to make political statements, we have to acknowledge that right now, people are using whatever platform they have. And we do see many athletes right now feeling, let's call it pressure to use their platform, use their stage. So guys, let's talk about this right now. How do you think this plays out? Al says he's not necessarily sure that these are the people that should be speaking. I could sit here and argue that anybody who earns a stage, earns a platform, has the right to use that platform. But I've also spoken to some players who feel right now that something is expected of them where they would like to just be playing football, frankly.
No, let me rephrase it. Any player can use their platform to do whatever they want, and they can say absolutely whatever they want. I'm not saying that players should not be making political statements or making political statements. I don't. I told you earlier, I'm an individualist. I feel personally that if you're trying to put a collective group of ideas above my individual ideas, I'm simply going to disagree with it. I don't use me because I'm a veteran, and don't use me because I serve in the military to satisfy any agendas. And I know a lot of people, have always been disappointed because I've never spoken about these issues. But in reality, I don't have the ideology that I should be supporting one particular group. I feel like I make my own decisions. I make, my own statements if I want to, if I feel like them, but, other than that, I don't feel like there's pressure from any particular group for me to be anything. Players have tremendous platforms. They can do a lot of good. They can use it for whatever they want. But also, like we said with COVID, connectivity in 2020 and social media and the world that we're, entering right now has a lot of potential issues. And I think everybody should be aware of them. And, we've talked, at length, misinformation, who is it that we're listening to, who are role models, what are the values that we have. I think all those things have to be taken in consideration. I don't consider myself a spokesman for any cause. And so that's the reason why, I try to be, in the shadows as much as I can, when it comes to these issues.
And I think that that's exactly my point, that Al has been very good in that he has indeed sort of felt a pull. Hey, will you speak on this? Will you do this? And Al has been able to rebuff that and say, you know what? I don't really want any part of that. That's not what I want to do. Osi, talk to me about this. Is this something that you ever felt? How do you see players managing that this coming season? Do you think there will be pressure to speak or not to speak to satisfy some group or to not offend another group?
There will be. There's going to be tremendous pressure simply because of the environment that we're in right now. For me, it's a very, I wouldn't say difficult, but it's tricky for me because I understand exactly why the players have to use this opportunity to speak out. They have to use this opportunity to get things across that maybe a lot of people weren't listening to begin with. They are in this position. They have all this stuff because basically the NFL has created this environment, and now they are using this opportunity when everybody's watching to say these things and to get these important messages out that actually, in reality, need to be heard. But in the same respect, I also understand that the NFL is a business, and working on that side of things now and seeing exactly what's going on. In my estimation, I think the main problem that we have, the main issue that we have is poverty. And I'm talking about as Black people. I'm talking about the main issue that we have realistically is poverty. Poverty is at the root cause of all the issues that we are really facing today. And when you think about the NFL, and I'm not saying that the NFL or the NBA or Major League Baseball, I'm not saying that the owners did this from the goodness of their heart, because quite frankly, I don't know if they did. I don't think that they did. But the fact of the matter is, these teams are creating a tremendous amount of wealth for Black players. I mean, they really are. They're creating a tremendous amount of wealth. I'm Nigerian. I've literally been able to help 10,000 Nigerian people simply from the amount of money that I made from the NFL. And I know a lot of these players are actually feeding people. They're taking care of a tremendous amount of their family members. They are able to do so many things because of this platform and this tremendous generational wealth that has been handed to them by the NFL. So in some respects, you want to use your platform to speak out and to say these things, but on the other hand, you must protect the NFL at all costs, because oddly enough, this is the only place where we're getting this wealth from. This is the only place where we're actually having the ability to speak out. So it's a very interesting dichotomy, because you have to speak out, you have to say these things, but you must also protect the NFL and exalt them and keep them up as high as you can, because this is where we're getting all our wealth from in this environment. It's a really, really difficult situation, but this is just the way I feel about it.
Okay, so Sam, give us the magic key right there. The people who do want to indeed use their platform, as Osi is saying, can indeed be so vital. How do you do that within the confines of a team? How do you make sure that you are not in any way rubbing any of your teammates or your coaches wrong?
Well, you might rub them wrong. I mean, I love what Osi said earlier about how a football team is almost a perfect society. And I think for that reason, it's true. I mean, there's such diversity on an NFL team that it's where we come to work together. And I think it's been given a pass in a way from having to deal with social issues and social pressures. It's an apolitical place where we just talk football and work together without all these other things encroaching. But I think what all the polls show, I mean, everything, the millennials and the generations following them, they're different. I mean, they care. They expect companies to have a social conscience. They expect their work to have meaning. I mean, they're more interested in meaning, and they don't think anything can be, apolitical or not connected to the larger world. So that's just the reality. The world has changed. That perfect society is changing. And, I think the challenge really for NFL teams and the opportunity is that you got to find a coach who has a different idea of how to handle this. And you've got to find player leaders who have a different creative idea about how to handle this situation. Because some people are going to use the NFL as a platform. I just think it's going to happen. It's already happening. And it's probably what people want. We have to build that meaning into football now. But that requires a different kind of leadership and a different kind of combination of coaching and team leadership to create the environment where that's not destructive. Because the one we've got right now, you're right. It's all about putting everything else aside and just focusing on the team. But you know what? That doesn't work. When you saw the anthem controversy, you saw what that does. It puts pressure on that system. So really, I think we need to start experimenting. We need to start looking to the NFL to try to figure out how you lead in a world where people are going to disagree very seriously and very publicly, but are also trying to accomplish something together. And we've never had to do that before as a country or as a sport. So I think it's, buckle your seatbelts.
Well, gentlemen, I certainly hope that it is indeed the NFL leading, because that means we have NFL games, and that's what we are all ultimately hoping for. All right, let's go back to 2011 when I was writing for Sam and covering Osi, and Sam had me do a story on an outfit called Afterburner. Tom Coughlin had brought in this company of former fighter pilots to teach his Giants team how to apply military principles, specifically the debriefing process, to what they were doing. And the idea here was that a player-led leadership program might be more valuable than a coach-led leadership program. The way this worked then was that Eli Manning, Justin Tuck would take each of their units, and players had to take accountability to themselves. So Al, you'll tell us later what's romanticized and what's legitimate, but let's start with Osi. When Coach Coughlin brings in the military, what do you think?
I thought it was awesome, to be honest with you. In 2008, I had the pleasure, I would say, to travel to Afghanistan and Iraq to go see the Marines out there in the military. On a USO tour, I was with Roger Goodell, Drew Brees. And so we went out there and we spent a lot of time with the members of the military. And I got to talk to quite a few of them and understand them. And I would see these kids, these 18, 19-year-old kids. And in my head, I couldn't understand what was going through their head to be in an active military zone. And I started to talk to some of them, and there was one thing that one guy, a Marine, he pulled me to the side and he told me, I was like, I tried to get him to explain to me how he felt about being there. I was like, do you like it? Do you enjoy it? He was like, listen, Osi, as I'm out here, I'm not really fighting for the United States military. And I was like, what do you mean by that? He was like, when I'm here, we come out here with the idea that we're fighting for the United States military. But when I'm here, you get to know the guy right next to you, like the guy who's in your unit, and you guys form a bond, you guys form a brotherhood. And when you're going out there to fight, you're actually fighting for them. You're fighting for the person next to you. And when he said that to me, I was like, wow, because I had never really thought about it in that term, in those terms. You would hear people, equate football to the military. In my head, I was like, man, get out of here. Football is nothing like the military. But when he said that to me, that you would go out there and we were playing or we were fighting for each other, it's almost the same thing as football, because you're out there, you're playing for the New York Giants, but then you get within your unit and you want to play for them. Like, you don't want to let those guys down. Those are your guys. And so when, Coach Coughlin brought in the military, I thought it was an appropriate thing to do. And the guys who we brought in came out, they talked, we understood what they were saying, and it actually helped us as a team.
Well, you won a Super Bowl that year, so
yeah, we did.
Maybe it made a difference. But I will say, if I could put my piece in, the best teams that I've ever been around are the guys that seem to be fighting for the player lined up next to him. And it really, truly, I don't know many teams where guys hated each other and still had a lot of success.
No, it's definitely all the great teams I've seen. I mean, there was that camaraderie, but, they were also good at arguing. I mean, it was funny. They were very good at having arguments and conflict, but they could fight heatedly, but then they would come to a resolution and move forward without hard feelings. So, it wasn't all just harmony and love. I mean, there was definitely an ability to fight. But, all the teams that I see, I mean, you can actually kind of break them down in terms of the roles that different leaders play, because it's never just one leader. Obviously, there are a lot of people that need to be part of it, and you can kind of break it down and look at the different roles that you need and the different functions you need. And so really, to me, it's almost about the group, and not just how tight the group is. Depends a lot on whether everyone feels like they're helping and contributing to leadership in some way and helping the team in their own way. And that, to me, is the perfect team. When everyone feels like they're making a contribution to the whole, but also free to do what they need to do to be great. And, that's the one thing I see across all sports and all teams that are great.
Okay, Al, tell us. What do we have right? What do we have wrong? What's romanticized? Where do the military and NFL and leadership worlds all collide and actually cross over?
Well, I'll start by saying this. Osi, in 2008, while you were hanging out in Afghanistan, I was in my room in New York, learning how to play defensive end, watching a
Wow.
highlight film of the New York Giants to the song by Jim Jones. We fly high
Balling.
over the
Oh
balling. Yes.
no.
I just came to the. I was learning how to play defensive end. It was the first position, and obviously you
Oh,
guys
that's
were in
so
New York.
cool.
I remember there was a music video of you guys doing the balling thing, and I would play before practice, and I would try to get myself all riled up. But I was too slow off the ball.
Wow.
That's what I figured out about my time as a defensive player. Uh, I think I think my perspective today, when it comes down to the military and both the NFL, especially my world, the world that I experience, not only with the Army but also the NFL, is that there's a component of masculinity that is involved in all this. Is that as a man, you're trying to find values and you're trying to find things that are going to make you a man. So in the United States, you walk into any high school, you walk into any college, and there's always going to be the football team. Especially if the football team is good, the guys that everybody's going to just look up to. Those are the in our society, the people that we look up to. I mean, even today, we're looking up, to football players for political advice and life advice in general, which is, a little bit too much. But it just speaks about, the values of America. And, alongside, the football players, you also have the soldiers, the ones that go out and fight the wars bravely, for our nation and for our way of life. And I felt like my journey throughout this, the NFL, both the NFL and the military, were related to masculinity and the things that you want to do to prove yourself as a man. And a lot of them have to do with challenges. So you join the military, and as soon as you walk in, you see that there's a pecking order. You have the grunts versus the non-grunts. You have the dirty, stinky legs versus the airborne. You have the Ranger tab versus the non-Ranger tab. And the military plays along to this. The military empties your uniform and they expect you to sort of fill it out, with awards. The combat infantry badge, which is the biggest badge you can find in the military, is awarded to those infantrymen who see combat. And so I felt like that was one of the biggest, especially as you're young, you're 21 years old, 22, just like Osi was mentioning, you're trying to establish your identity and who you are. Those things matter tremendously. And then after you've accomplished those things, after you made the team, after surviving training camp, when you got undrafted or whatever, whatever your course might be, and you start the season and you start playing and you start enjoying it, then it's after when you get to the playoffs that you're making these statements that are like, I want to play for the guy to my left and right. But if you ask a player, week 3 of the preseason, they're going to say, hey, man, I want the guy to my left and right to be out of the team so I can make it. And it's the same thing in Ranger School, the same thing in airborne school. You want those around you to weed out so that you can be the strong. And then afterwards, when you've proven yourself that you are this masculine figure that can accomplish all the goals, then at that moment you're ready to join something bigger than yourself. And so that cycle is pretty beautiful. A lot of times I feel like in today's society we neglect masculinity and we neglect the needs and the wants of men. But in that journey, especially from a football player to a soldier, those things matter tremendously. We size each other up constantly. We want to be the best for ourselves, for our family, and for our perception. And so a lot of the things about war get romanticized after the fact. But people forget about, the journey, the conversations you have with yourself at training camp. They're definitely not, all of them about teamwork.
In this time, with our times being so different, with motivations and incentives being so different, as we talk about identity and individualism, what should leadership look like? What do the best leaders today sort of seize upon?
I went to West Point, which is the premier leadership school in America. I served in the military, and I had leadership roles that I, learned and I embraced. That I enjoyed doing to a degree that surprised me and taught me so much about myself. And there was always the constant question of, who's a good leader? What is a virtuous leader? What is right leadership and whatnot? And just like I've said, many times throughout this conversation, my perspective as an immigrant, who didn't grow up in this country, was always that you have to believe in yourself above what the group is always going to tell you. And I experienced this in Afghanistan as a leader when, unfortunately, and many times, you had to buy into this idea that we were making a lot of progress and that we were winning the war when you were seeing it every day that was not the case. And the leadership that sort of started happening was abiding by and sort of submitting to the collective, and whatever everybody was saying, you just had to go agree with it, because that was the established definition of leadership, that everybody sort of had to agree upon. The definition that Petraeus came up with, counterinsurgency, we're gonna win the hearts and minds, and we're gonna do all these things. And in reality, individual soldiers, platoon leaders like myself, the grunts in the front lines, we were questioning severely, that these virtuous leadership principles were working. So, as an immigrant, as somebody who has always had the American dream, in mind, the fact that I don't depend on anybody else to be successful except for myself, I agree that America has a lot of challenges, that it is not perfect, that just like masks, like gun violence and a lot of these issues, we can do a lot better. But I don't think the answer for leadership is in someone else. I think it's always going to be within ourselves.
Absolutely. I'll have to agree with that. And I think the one issue that we're not really addressing, and people I don't think are really addressing, is I think a leader has to be truthful, a leader has to be authentic, and a leader has to be able to get to the heart of the actual issue. I think a lot of times what we do is we gloss over, or we pay lip service to things, but we're not really addressing what's really going on. And if you're not able to come out and articulate what the real problem is, then I don't see how you can be a real leader and being able to solve the issues. There's a lot of issues going on, not only in the United States, not only here in the United Kingdom, in Nigeria, where I'm from. There's issues everywhere. And what we have, in my opinion, is are leaders who aren't really being truthful, and leaders who aren't actually coming out and addressing the real issues, the things that are really affecting the people. And as long as you continue to do that, and as long as you continue to not address these issues, you're going to continue to have divisions. And that's why we're in the situation that we're in today.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think one of the problems that I see, and it's not just it's in sports, but it also happens in business. It happens a lot in politics, is that, we create this system around leadership where there are all these things that you have to do, and you're expected to give great speeches and be kind of really charismatic, and it's great serving the community. There's all these things, these pressures that come in leadership in sports. But then there's also, in politics, you have to go through these debates and these primaries, and you have to love talking to people, and you have to constantly be putting yourself out there and watching every word you say. We're making it so difficult to the point where if you want to be a leader, you really have to want it. You have to want that. And the kind of people that really want to be leaders, that really want the responsibility, a lot of them are doing it because of the privilege and because of the ego gratification it gives them. They're not doing it because they really believe so much in the collective goals that they have to see them through. They're doing it for their own satisfaction. And, I think we have a lot of leftover people in leadership roles who just wanted it so badly that now they're leading, and they're not necessarily having any agenda or purpose other than staying there. And I think that's a problem not just in politics and in business, but in locker rooms. And, often I always talk about Eisenhower, who's one of the most underrated presidents, the most popular president ever, by the way, in terms of approval rating, a two-term president. Eisenhower didn't want to be president. They actually put his name on the ballot in New Hampshire against his will. He didn't even know, because they wanted him to run, and he didn't want to run. But eventually he said, all right, everybody wants me to run. I'm going to run. And he was one of our best presidents. So, a lot of times it's the reluctant person. It's a person who doesn't want the leadership. They want to do a good job, and they want the team to win, but they don't want the prestige and everything that goes with the leadership. That's the best leader you have. And we don't have many people like that. I mean, can you imagine somebody who's reluctant to be a captain on the team? They're going to be like, well, you're obviously even lack confidence, or something's wrong with you. So we're going to give it to this guy who's always giving big speeches all day long, right?
Yeah, to be a real leader, I think you have to really understand the situation at hand. And when you see the magnitude of the problem, a lot of times you're like, man, I don't want no part of that. This might be a little bit too much for me. And so you want to go in the complete opposite direction. Whereas the people who want that, just like Sam said, they want that for a completely different reason. They don't want to be, they don't really want to address the problems. They don't want to really address the issues. They just want the pomp and, the grandeur of being a president, or being a prime minister, or being a king, or whatever you may. But to really, truly understand the issues and to understand the complexities and the, how difficult it is to actually and be truthful. I think this is where, most of the people who are actually really smart and who are capable of leading will look and they'll be like, let me just go sit down somewhere else. And these are the people who you actually need to be leaders.
So I always say that, I talk about this, and one of the findings from my book was, it's funny. It's almost, if you go into a room and you want to see who's really doing the leadership work on a team. I mean, I said this about Tim Duncan, right? No one, if you came into that room, you would never think he was the leader of the team, so he didn't carry himself that way. But a lot of times it is the last person you'd expect who's actually doing the leadership work, because the leadership work's often invisible. It's behind the scenes. You don't get credit for it, right? I mean, the best thing, and I wonder if this rings true for you guys and your experience on teams, but my sense is that the real leader of a team, the person that everyone's going to look to in a crisis when it really matters, is that one person who may not say much or really be, front and center when things are going well, but when that building's on fire and no one else will run in, when there's an issue no one else will deal with inside the team, your leader is the person who's going in, and everyone knows they're going in. That's the person who ultimately is the soul, the backbone of the team. Is that, you guys think that rings true in the teams you've been on?
Yeah, well, hopefully the Steelers facility doesn't catch on fire, and we don't have to see, who's the person who's going to go in. But I do talk about this, quite a bit also with my good buddy David DeCastro, and I always tell him, that I wish that for this crisis, this COVID crisis, we had a plumber in charge of making these decisions, because a plumber is going to worry about seeing the problem, identifying the problem, and fixing the problem. But unfortunately, a politician, and this is something that happens with democracy, is going to have to worry about the popularity of his decisions, and that's going to be the thing at the forefront of his mind is what are my ratings, how are people going to react to these things, and not so much about the issue at hand. So the same thing could be said about many of the issues that we have in today's economy. It's incredibly complex for the average person to understand. So asking somebody to vote on it, seems a little useless. It seems like it's going to be somebody who's going to sell this idea behind a policy. The thing that's going to matter the most when it comes to obtaining the vote, and not necessarily, the right choice, for everybody.
We'll say that, but I'm just going to throw out there that Al and I have had many discussions about what really makes an expert, who is an expert, and whether we should be listening to experts. And I'll add one more little postscript. I very quickly just ran through the last 10 teams that I spent a very significant amount of time with. I think less than half of them, Sam, was the captain, actually the guy that I thought was the leader. Welcome. We are continuing our roundtable discussions here at the NFL Network. And today we are joined by three of the smartest people I know, one of whom I spend quite a bit of my life arguing with. So first, Al Villanueva. He is a veteran of 3 tours in Afghanistan. He is an Army Ranger. He's the Steelers' left tackle, and he has never met a debate he did not want to engage in. Then over on the other end is Sam Walker. He is the author of the definitive book on leadership in sports. He's the founder of the Wall Street Journal sports section. He's the man who taught me, tell the story and get out of the way. And I still listen to that. And then, of course, we have Osi Umenyiora. He's a 2-time Super Bowl winner. He's number 4 on the Giants sack list. He's the greatest player to come out of Great Britain. And I bet Osi's family would still like to see him go to law school.
Absolutely.
So, gentlemen, thank you for being here with us today. And let's start with this. We are in the midst of 3 mega consciousness-affecting disasters: a pandemic, the condition of the economy, and a general state of civil unrest. Now, on top of that, we're going to throw in arguably the most polarizing election of our generation. The way that I see it, navigating a locker room suddenly looks a lot trickier. Al, since you will be doing this next week, when people are dealing with all of this, when people have such diametrically different viewpoints, how do you get them to coexist in a locker room? How do you get them to buy into a common goal?
Well, I think first and foremost, above all the causes that people can have as individuals, the one thing that we're looking forward to doing is seeing each other, to talking to each other, to debate these ideas. But in reality, we're also football players. We have that the forefront of our discussions, and we understand that we cannot get so caught up in what we feel individually because we're so limited in our knowledge. And we understand that we don't know so much. So we argue, for the sake of friendship, for the sake of establishing a good discussion and exchanging ideas, but never with the intention of changing one's minds, of falling into identity politics and feeling like, my identity is threatened if you have a different identity than mine.
Now, Sam, you've done a lot of research in this area, actually, and when you have teams where people really do view the world so differently, is that a negative? Is that a positive? What is that?
So the big surprise to me in my research is that I feel like sometimes diversity of opinion, viewpoint, is a huge strength for a team. In fact, in the U.S., I think sports are an important part of how we work together, because we are a nation of immigrants. We come together in sports. We invest more in sports than any other country, because I think that's where we have learned to work together, work through some of these issues. So sports has always been a place where you go to learn how to interact with people and work with them, people who are different than you. Now, the current situation we're in, though, is so divisive that, the rest of the world in a way needs to catch up. And, I think the problem for sports teams is that it's getting harder and harder to do what you have to do to be an elite team. And what you really have to do is whatever your whatever culture is, whatever role you play in your own tribe, you have to let that go and be part of that team. And you have to subscribe to the team's values and the team's culture. And a lot of great dynasties have been very diverse because everyone buys into the common culture. And that's getting harder to do because the issues we're facing are so difficult and the world is getting so divisive.
Osi, 2 Super Bowl winning teams. Were those 2 teams the closest teams that you were like? Were those the most homogenous teams you were on?
No question about that. I think we really enjoyed being around each other. We enjoyed coming to practice. We enjoyed all the little ins and outs about everything that has to do with football. And the one thing I will say about being in the NFL locker room or being in the NFL in general is, oddly enough, the NFL, for some reason, the owners, whatever you want to call it, for some reason, they have created almost like as close to a perfect society as you can get. And the reason why I'm saying that is because everybody in there has a level of respect for each other, because of you almost understand that in order for you to be in that locker room, you have to have been really, really good at your job. And so it's a meritocracy. And this, I think, fosters an environment of just mutual respect. So no matter what somebody thinks about, no matter where somebody's from, no matter what their religion is, you understand that here in this locker room and here on that football field, you guys are the same. And so it almost brings you together. You almost come over there and you remove all your differences, because out there on that football field, you have to work together to succeed. And this is, in my opinion, I think this is the way society in general should work. I think they should be looking at the NFL or at the NBA or Major League Baseball to see the way this environment has been created and see if they can somehow replicate that on the outside.
Yeah, I think one of the beautiful things that I appreciate about American football is the fact that it reflects a lot of the values of American society. And the fact that individualism is extremely valued in this country. The fact that you can pave your own road to success. I always joke with De Castro, who's one of my best friends. in American football, you have almost 7 or 8 as many awards for individual achievements as you do for team achievements. You have the Super Bowl that you can win as a team, but then you can continuously focus on individual awards that you can win by yourself. The NFL Network is obviously guilty of this. As soon as the season is over, they cannot wait to start ranking players without having any consideration of who they play with, who their teammates were, the organization that they belong. In America, we're focused about the individual and what he can bring to the table. And so, it's got its negatives and it's got its positives, but I think that when you understand that as an individual, you can benefit from somebody also being driven and trying to pave their own way, just like Osi mentioned, I think you have great results. And I think I've experienced that in American football, and I've truly enjoyed my journey in this country, understanding this concept of individualism.
Yeah, but Al, even as you mentioned, David DeCastro, who really truly is one of the best guards in football, both of you sort of mock that a little bit. You mock the individual awards. You talk about how the Pro Bowl is kind of a popularity contest to some degree. So how can you sit here and you say you applaud the individualism?
You know what? It's similar to, I was having this conversation with my brother who lives in Europe regarding the use of masks, and why Americans are so reluctant to wear masks. When in Europe, you just order everybody to wear a mask and they wear it. And I think the American has this notion that he's going to do what he wants because he wants to do it, right? He's not going to do it because someone else tells him to do it. And there's a lot of political problems that we have, because of that same logic. You can talk about the Second Amendment in the United States. You can talk about, many other cases where, this idea that, I'm going to make my own decisions. I'm not going to let the collective make a decision over me is not beneficial for everybody. But I do like at the end, the fact that this is just the way that you do it in America. We do have these top 10. We're always going to compare Michael Jordan to LeBron and Kobe Bryant. And that's just the way it is. It's something that makes us very unique, as Americans.
Well, so I spent a lot of time studying the greatest teams in sports history and looking at the leadership of those teams, the captains of those teams. And what always shocked me was that, yeah, we have that individuality, but in a way that the great leaders, the ones who won the most, whose teams won the most for the long time, didn't really subscribe to that. They didn't want to be seen. They were uncomfortable with individual awards. They were all about team accolades. So my favorite story is Bill Russell, who, in my view, is the greatest captain in the history of sports, period. The Celtics won 11 NBA titles in 13 years, which is incomparable. I mean, no other NBA team will ever do this. And he was the leader and the captain, even the coach at one point. But what Russell did in 75, he was elected to the Hall of Fame, first ballot. And he sent a letter back saying, I'm not interested. So he never went to his induction. He had no part of it. He's never visited. He didn't want to be in it. He said, you can induct me if you want, but I don't want to be a part of this. And he later explained himself and he said, I only care about team accomplishments. So I'm not anything that the Hall of Fame celebrates individual ability. And so, if my teammates are involved, I'm not interested because this is a group sport. And, it was that sense that they were almost uncomfortable with individual awards because they felt like everything is filtered through the team. And that's the only way to have a great team is if you care more about the collective genuinely than how you're perceived or how your contributions are perceived. And I think that's a huge stumbling block for most teams. They just don't operate that way.
Well, Sam, and as you say that, it feels as if every great coach I've ever been around always says that at the end of the day, it is supposed to be about the team goals, that if everybody wins, everybody eats. It reminds me, Al, of Mike Tomlin telling Antonio Brown after 6 consecutive years of 100 catches and 1,000 yards, you have accomplished everything individually you want to accomplish. You're hunting trophies. That's what it is. And, again, I know Osi has heard this. Al, I know you've heard this, that at the end of the day, what will cement your legacy is those championships. And so if Sam says you have to subvert yourself and subvert the individual awards, I guess we listen to Professor Walker, right?
I have a pretty interesting take on this that I learned, and Osi is going to really be able to relate to this as he was a great pass rusher in his career. So Mike Munchak was my offensive line coach for 5 years. And I learned everything about playing the offensive line position from him. So while the offensive line position is one, where you have your individual battles, you have to understand how you relate, to one another. And so he had this technique called the vertical set that he wanted tackles to start using, where you would sacrifice a lot of aggressiveness, a lot of momentum on your side in order to benefit the guard and not leave a huge space so that he would not get beat, by a 3 technique who has a lot more room to operate. So that's a case where, and talk about leadership and being able to find, the perfect teams. Everybody has to have the common goal, and everybody has to understand how their individuality can benefit, one another. If I can help the guard and he can help me, we can both benefit on the football field. And Osi knows that as soon as sometimes he lines up really wide, the tackle's going to try to kick set and try to go get him, and either a twist is going to happen or the guard is going to have a huge space, and one of them is going to have a higher probability of getting beat by the rusher.
Absolutely, man. And I would see that, and I would get even wider. I'd want to line up all the way off the screen if possible. But I think, football is a really interesting sport because, especially in the professional level, we get paid for performance. And so I definitely want to go out there and get as many sacks as possible. People don't want to give up sacks. It's a whole bunch of, you have to perform as an individual to the best of your ability in order for you to be able to get paid and take care of your family. But then you also have to sacrifice for your teammates. And so the ability to kind of put all that together, you wanting to go out there and perform and do the things necessary for you to make the Pro Bowl or, become an All-Pro. All those things working in conjunction with the goals of the team, they kind of seem counterproductive, but they're not. Because the way I see it, if I perform to the best of my ability, if I did the great things that, I was able to do, that would actually help the team win. And, I'm sure receivers think, oh, throw me the ball as much as possible if you want to win. And, it just goes on and on and on because individually you have to perform to get paid, but then you also want the team to win. So you have to find a way to put those 2 things together and balance them.
So, guys, before we put a button on this topic, I need to tell a story. This is a story that Sam Walker had me write when the Giants were in the Super Bowl against the Patriots in Indianapolis, and it was all about the stunts and the twists that the Giants defensive line would run. So I go to Justin Tuck, and Justin tells me all about how he loves doing this, and this is what makes their defensive line so great. And I go to Osi, and Osi tells me, oh yeah, I hate doing it. I just want to get at the quarterback. But Osi's like, Justin wants to do it, and Justin calls them, and what am I supposed to do? But my teammate says I have to do it. And I go back to Sam, and I'm like, I don't think I have a story. One guy hates doing this. And Sam says to me, you've actually got a better story, that the one guy does it, even though he doesn't want to.
Absolutely. Yes. I hated running those stunts because I'd have to go in there and bang on a guard, and sometimes, Bill would just pass me off, and if you don't run it correctly, man, you're going to run straight into a brick wall. It wasn't good for me.
I spent a living analyzing pass rushers and their mentality, their attitude, and it's very fascinating to see sort of just like Osi was talking about. Their individual goal is to get paid, and I feel like for edge rushers, their benchmark, especially in today's NFL, is to get double-digit sacks. If you want to respect yourself. If you want the NFL to respect you, you must have consistently every year double-digit sacks. So it's really interesting throughout the season, just how players fall into different statuses. So a lot of times players start playing and they just want to get as many sacks. The sack race begins, and they're going to play every single the first few games as hard as they can to try to get a comfortable lead into maybe 5-6 sacks by game 5 or 6. Also, make sure that the division of labor between pass rushers benefits, yourself. You don't want somebody who becomes a third down specialist to take your job. So the first quarter of the season, edge rushers are going crazy, and then they have to give themselves a couple games for injuries. Osi's laughing because he knows it's absolutely true. And then depends on where you are with the season, depends on where you are, with your career and whatnot. Then you do have the ability, and this is crazy. And I know that edge rushers don't do it on purpose, but they just shut it down sometimes. They need a mental break because for them, is not so much, and I don't mean this, as accusing them of having lower character. I think edge rushers are by far the most valued players on the football field, but sometimes they just, once they've gotten closer to that 8, 9, 10 number, once the season is maybe on the wraps, then they can just relax a little bit. And it's really funny to see that dynamic between, the pass rush room, who's going to have the divisional labor, who's going to rush on third down, and how an edge rusher has to get to those 10 sacks, and how he's going to pace himself throughout the season.
It's such a great point, and I think what we're talking about really is superstars and their relationship to the team, because there's certain people who just have so much talent that they should be left alone. The whole team should support them to put all the work in they need to play at the level they play at. And the thing that I've found on a lot of elite teams, great dynasties, is that, to my shock, the superstar players were not the captains, were not the leaders. Like Pelé was never the captain of the great Brazilian teams, And I talked to Andre Iguodala about this, and obviously the Golden State Warriors, like a recent basketball dynasty, and he was the leader and captain of that team, but certainly not the biggest star. That was Steph Curry, and this is a team that had Kevin Durant as well. But Andre said that this is something they talked about, and that Steph Curry, from watching his father play, understood that it's very hard to be a superstar and a leader, because a superstar has to be selfish to some degree. You have to be able to stand with your teammates, but then there have to be times where you stand apart and you're the one who takes the shot, even if you're not on that night. You have to be an island unto yourself in some ways and left alone to do your work. So it's very hard to do that and also lead the team, because leading a team is really about every day, interpersonal relationships, like all the little issues that come up, doing all the grunt work, the thankless stuff that no one notices. And a superstar most superstars can't do that. So, what you need is a superstar like Steph Curry, who buys into the team concept, but can also be a part and can take from the team and be grateful for what they've been given. But doesn't see themselves as a part or bigger or better than the team. That's one of the hardest things to pull off. And so many teams just say, "Oh, you're the superstar, you're the face of the team, you're the best player, you're now the captain." And I think that's unfair, because I think the leadership job is too much for them sometimes.
And we do say, Sam, in sports a lot that the best players have a bit of edge to them. They have the polite way to say it, I guess, would be they have a little jerk to them.